Hi all. Today we're going to talk about a disappointing sequel. We're going to talk about Bioshock 2. Spoilers ahead for both Bioshock and Bioshock 2. We need to talk about both games as things are not disappointing in a vacuum generally. You generally need a point of comparison to call something disappointing. So this starts with Bioshock, which came out in 2007. And was basically just a easier, more steampunky version of System Shock 2 with no inventory system. None of that was a detriment to the game, as it had an interesting setting, interesting characters, very well-written stories, and pretty solid gameplay. Bioshock 2, on the other hand, had solid gameplay, and that's about the only positive you can give to that game. At least when comparing it to the first game. So let's go through each of these, starting with setting. In both games, the setting is Rapture, which is a city under the sea that's some kind of Randian objectivist paradise, where things went very, very wrong. While technically being the same place, the Rapture we see in the first game versus the second game are two completely different places. In Bioshock, every area in Rapture is very distinct. So much so that with just one screenshot you could tell exactly where that was within the game. There were forests, there were factories, there were businesses, and they all looked very unique. Bioshock 2's Rapture, on the other hand, everything looks almost identical. You're in an amusement park, or a shopping area, or a hotel, or an abandoned lab, and all of these areas are almost indistinguishable from one another. Next up, we have characters. In Bioshock 1, we meet many characters, but very rarely in person. We get to know them mostly through audio logs that are strewn all over the game. But despite that, you really get to know the characters. You get a sense of who they are as a person, their ups and their downs. You get a three-dimensional picture. This is because not everything that you're told about them or told by them has anything to do with what's going on right at this second. You have extra information that's there just to know the character better. And this is in very stark contrast to what you get in the second game, where you actually do meet a good many characters in person. And you still have audio logs, but everything said by any character is just to move the story along. There is nothing extra. It's literally just hints and clues and the barest amount of exposition possible to get you to the end of this area and ultimately to game. So despite having 3D models, they are in fact very two-dimensional characters. Last in the disappointing department, we have story. On a very basic level, both games share the same story. A main character trying to find their way out of Rapture. However, in Bioshock 1, there were two other important stories. The story of Andrew Ryan, and the story of Frank Fontaine/Atlas. Andrew Ryan was the man who first set out to build Rapture. He was a free market objectivist, and over the course of the game we find out how he was tried by his own ideals and how he very much failed them. And in the end we see him essentially die to sort of repent for what he has done, for becoming the thing that he hates, with his last words being a man decides and a slave obeys. Whereas Frank Fontaine/Atlas is a man without ideals. He's entirely out for himself and will do anything and crush anything in his way to attain his goals. So much so that he ultimately destroys himself with his own ambition. Which is, to an extent, quite ironic, because he is the enemy of Andrew Ryan, yet he behaves much more in keeping with the ideals of Andrew Ryan than Andrew Ryan himself. In Bioshock 2, on the other hand, we only have one story, and that is the story of Sophia Lamb. She's an insane woman who wants to talk about reality by consensus. She attempts to turn her daughter into a super being to rule like a god, and takes an already run-down Rapture and makes it worse. So she was working on about a Starscream level of villainy here. So in conclusion, Bioshock 2 was a disappointment because of its story, characters, and setting. As I mentioned before, its gameplay was fine, and I certainly still enjoy playing the game, but in literally every other aspect, it comes up short. Thank you.